Everything Action presents Invasion USA by Jason Frost. Chapter 1. There was blood on her hands. "Is it safe?" Domingo asked her. "Safe?" Angela said. She returned her bleeding hand to the thick wooden tiller, gripping it tightly. Blood squeezed out of its open calluses and soaked into the old, weather-beaten wood. The pain was like sharp nails being hammered into her palms, but she showed no sign of it to the others. It was the best that Domingo didn't see the blood or calluses. He would insist on taking the tiller himself, and he was not as good a sailor as she. "Angela," he repeated, "is it safe?" "Yes, the mast is safe. If the weather remains kind, it will not break." "That, at least, is a blessing." "Blessing?" Miguel sneered, his thin, bony body hunched against the taffrail. "It would be a blessing if we had never left Cuba. The food is gone. The weather will be gone by noon. We are 28 people squeezed into a broken-down boat that could barely hold 28 fish. Pirates roam these waters, and if the Americans catch us, they'll send us back to Cuba." Juan, a young boy of 13, looked up with fear. "Is that true, Angela? If the Americans catch us, they will send us back?" Angela smiled at her little brother. "They will not catch us." Miguel started to say something, but a sharp look from Angela silenced him. She studied what was left of the stars, keeping the tiny sailboat aimed toward Florida. The sky was still dark, but the morning sun was already peeling back at the edges of night along the eastern horizon. Angela's hands had gripped the tiller so long last night that even when Domingo took his turn so she could sleep, she'd still felt the pressure of the round wood against her empty palms. After that, she'd given up trying to sleep at all. Now she looked out over the refugees. Old couples, young couples, orphan children. Some might not survive this coming day. Their eyes looked dull, their skin dry and fleeting from the punishment of sun and salt air. Angela had had several opportunities to make this trip before. Many from her village had gone, never to be heard from again. Sometimes she read in the newspapers about the sunken ships, dead Cuban bodies, half-eaten, washed up on the clean, white beaches of fancy Miami hotels. But the newspapers never printed stories about those who made it. Domingo had been telling her ever since their marriage 5 years ago, always trying to convince her. He was the optimistic one. She was the sensible one. Her father had told her that she had the blood of Cortez in her veins. Cortez had been assistant to the governor of Cuba in 1518, when he set out to conquer Montezuma and the Aztecs. He'd been 33, same age as she. Now Angela, too, was setting out, not because of Cortez or even Domingo, but because of the baby, barely 3 months old, growing inside of her. The baby deserved a better life. She had not even told Domingo, knowing he would become fearful for her, for his child, and not want to risk the dangerous voyage. No, better tell him later, when they were safe in Miami. Miguel fidgeted with the tiny transistor radio. Everyone watched him, a dim glow of hope in their tired eyes. Static crackled. He adjusted the tuner with the delicacy of a safecracker. A fragmented voice would be heard, then fade tauntingly. Then suddenly, one voice broke through. "Rockin' talkin', Danny DePesto coming at ya. The ruler of records, the pope of platters, the goon with the time. The Ministro of Miami giving you the solid gold hits." A loud cheer drowned out the rest of the DJ's words as the refugees hugged and kissed each other. Laughter cut through the night, the chilly breeze. The happy sound seemed strange to Angela, for she had not heard laughter since the first day when the greasy engine had sputtered and coughed and died. "Solid gold hits," Domingo mimicked in broken English, then laughed. "In America, everything is gold," young Juan put in. "The streets are paved with gold." "They are not paved with gold," Miguel said. "At least they're paved," Angela said. Even Miguel smiled at that. The radio crackled with Cyndi Lauper's "Girls Just Want to Have Fun." Old Carlo put his blankets tighter around his 94-year-old shoulders, making it humming with the radio. His wife held his hand and hummed with him. Soon others joined in, humming with the words they couldn't understand. Some made up Spanish lyrics. Little Juan pulled out his bamboo flute and played along. They all stared straight ahead as if any minute they expected to see Florida's welcoming shores. "America," Domingo sighed as if that word said it all. Everyone nodded in agreement. "A boat! A boat!" Juan yelled, pointing excitedly. Angela cupped a hand over her eyes and squinted into the rising sun. Indeed, a boat was coming straight at them, its night lights still shining. She couldn't tell what kind of boat yet. Automatically, she stiffened. One blistered hand went to her stomach to assure the baby. "Angela?" Juan asked. "Shh!" She had no answers for him. Domingo put his arm around her shoulder. She felt better. No one spoke. No one breathed. They watched a distant boat speeding toward them, bullying water out of its way. "The flag!" Juan cried. "It's American!" "Thank God," Angela said. "Thank God," Miguel spat. "The Americans will send us home." "Maybe not," Angela said. "But even if they do, we will come back again. And again." She looked lovingly into Domingo's eyes. He smiled at her. "And again." Miguel shrugged. "You are right, Angela. It could have been worse. It could have been Cuban. Then there would have been no return." The other refugees sagged with resignation. The whole boat seemed to sink slightly into the water. "Do not worry," Angela told him cheerfully. "Cuba has 3,700 islands and cays. We will hide on one until we try again." They all stared sadly at her, except for old Carlo. He threw off his blanket and began waving it at the coming ship, clearly a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. "What are you doing, old man?" Miguel asked. "Welcoming our guests. Today we welcome them. Tomorrow," he shrugged, "perhaps the other way around." Soon everyone was happily waving hands or clothing at the approaching ship. Angela held the tiller steady as Domingo lowered the sail. The larger ship pulled along their tiny creaking boat, which she had bought from that bandit Castillo for far too much money. She looked up at the bulwark and saw the tall captain, flanked on either side by a stiff-backed crewman. The sun was directly behind them, so Angela couldn't make out the faces, but the uniform said it all. Crisp, clean, no wrinkles. They bespoke the promise of America. She touched her stomach again and smiled up at the captain. She couldn't see his eyes under his hat, but she saw him return the smile. She sighed. Finally, she could relax her vigilance. The captain checked his watch, tugged his left sleeve down, and nodded. Two other crewmen with rifles on their backs threw lines into the tiny boat. Angela noticed that the men next to the captain were also armed with nasty-looking guns. She didn't blame them. She knew these waters were sailed by pirates and drug smugglers. "Look at the guns, Angela," Juan said excitedly. "Hurry, Juan," she urged, ushering toward the bow where the refugees were preparing to disembark. Old Carlo went first. He was the oldest, he was the kindest, the best among them. The captain of the Coast Guard cutter leaned over the railing to offer a helping hand to the old fisherman. Angela felt a tear of happiness at the sight. The captain smiled, his clean, pale hand closing around old Carlo's dark, leathery one. Then everything went wrong. The captain's other hand suddenly swung around from behind his back. In it was a huge pistol, big and black like a crow. Still smiling, he pressed the muzzle against old Carlo's confused face and fired. Blood and brain and chips of bone splashed back along the others. Angela felt a sharp splinter of skull stick into her cheek like a bee sting. Warm blood, either hers or old Carlo's, dripped like syrup down her face. Now all four crewmen joined their captain, their weapons clattering in harsh harmony as they fired into the helpless crowd. Some of the refugees jumped overboard, but these were immediately shot. Others merely knocked against each other in panic. They too were shot. Angela watched all in a confused haze as if she were the bride at a wedding where she recognized no one, least of all the groom. She saw a bullet drill through Miguel's throat, the blood spraying up the back of his neck like bright fireworks. He flipped overboard like a giddy child. As he floated there face down, a fat fish swam up from the depth and began nibbling at the hole in his neck. Next to her, 4 shots hammered into Domingo's t-shirt. His chest collapsed like a mudslide. He tried to say something to Angela as he fell, but then he too was dead. Angela grabbed Juan and pushed him down atop other bodies. Just as she did, she felt a pain in her stomach and wondered if the baby could possibly be kicking already. Then she saw the blood. A large bullet had chewed through her belly. She fell down. Her first thought was a hope that the bullet had missed the baby. She had never been shot before and was surprised at how fiery hot the wound felt. The shooting continued. Angela felt Juan squirming beneath her, but he was not shot. She stilled him with a sharp pinch. The tall captain with the crisp uniform said something in a language that was not English or Spanish. Angela thought it sounded like Russian. At the captain's words, all the guns but one stopped shooting. Through half-open lids, she saw one crewman still firing at the already dead bodies. Someone called him Koyo. He was Oriental, his face a grim mask of hatred. The captain again, tugging at his left sleeve, turned to one of the crewmen at his side. "Nico!" The man named Nico rushed over to Koyo and grabbed the weapon out of his hand. The Oriental, face contorted with bloodlust, glared at Nico. Nico ignored him and carried the guns below deck. Angela remained still, hardly breathing as she watched. Around her, she could hear the moans of some of the wounded. Perhaps the ship would simply leave now. There was a chance she could still save Juan, maybe the baby. The tall captain marched over to one of the other crewmen, a short, muscular man whose face was soaked with sweat. He was fumbling with the cap of a medicine bottle. The captain yanked the bottle out of his hand, examined the contents, frowned, and threw it overboard. He spoke rapidly in German to the man, addressing him as Kurt. When he finished talking, the captain slapped Kurt. Kurt took one angry step toward the captain, but suddenly stopped, looked away. Nico appeared on deck again, dragging someone behind him. Angela immediately recognized Castillo, the man who'd sold her the boat. They spoke in Spanish. "Mother of God," Castillo said, gazing out over the dead and mangled bodies. He quickly crossed himself. "Where is it?" the tall captain asked, but Castillo was too shocked to answer. The captain grabbed Castillo by the throat. "Where?" The foredeck." The captain checked his watch again and boarded the little sailboat. Kurt, the Oriental, and the last crewman followed him aboard. Nico stayed on the cutter with Castillo. Angela watched the 4 men march toward the bow, stepping on the bodies as if they were stones. Whenever they came up to anyone stirring or moaning, they immediately shot him. The young one stopped suddenly and began pawing aside some of the bodies. Roughly, he pulled pretty Juanetta out from under the other bodies and propped her against the mast. She was 16. Blood streamed down her left arm from a shoulder wound. She stared at him, frozen with fear, as he leernessly began unbuttoning her blouse. A small, firm breast was revealed. She moved a hand to cover herself, but he batted it away, grabbing the breast with such force that she cried out in pain. "Tomas!" the captain said coldly. When Tomas looked up, the captain lifted his gun and fired. His gun punched through Juanetta's chest, inches from Tomas's hand. Her blood splattered across his knuckles. Tomas laughed, wiped his hand on his pants, and caught up with the others. Angela felt Juan shivering beneath her. She squeezed his hand, and he continued to play dead. The captain pointed, and the other 3 crewmen began kicking aside bodies, throwing others overboard. Kurt and Tomas pried at the boards with crowbars. After a few minutes, the Oriental reached down into the hole and pulled up a plastic bag full of white powder. Angela knew it was cocaine. They loaded bag after bag into green duffel bags, tossing them up to Nico. Angela had never seen so great a quantity of drugs before. She knew little of such matters, but suspected their worth was in the millions. When the captain and his men had returned to their ship, Nico kicked Castillo in the back, sending him plunging over the rail and into the sailboat. The boat rocked wildly, and again, Angela felt the pain in her stomach. Still, she didn't move. Maybe they would leave now, leave them alone in the boat. She might yet get them to Miami. She closed her eyes, not wanting to take any chances. "What are you doing?" Castillo screamed. Angela heard a splashing sound, smelled the bitter scent of gasoline. "You promised," Castillo begged. "You promised." The Coast Guard cutter pulled away, and she heard rough laughter. She opened her eyes again, saw Castillo's fat, clumsy body running for the side of the boat as he tried to hurl himself over. But he tripped on the bodies and fell crying. Angela pushed herself up, hand clutched her stomach. She tugged one after her. The smell of gasoline was thick and stinging. The fumes burned her eyes. She struggled toward the side of the boat, dragging her brother behind. Then she looked up and saw the tall captain in his crisp, clean uniform. He was smiling as he raised the thick flare gun in both hands, aimed and fired. The blazing missile hurtled toward them like a fiery comet. Angela relaxed. She knew it was too late. When the flare hit the gasoline-soaked bodies, the flames exploded in a 20-foot wave of fire. As the blaze swept over Angela and Juan, she heard the final gasp of Miguel's transistor radio. "Rockin' Tonkin' Danny DePesto, only 9 shopping days before Christmas, playing the latest greats from Kenny Loggins, hitting the charts at number 37, bound to be another solid gold hit." Then the heat melted the radio, and Angela, and the boat.